Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to another episode of Sree's Daily Global COVID-19 Show. My name is Sree Sreenivasan, and it's my honor to convene this daily conversation around various aspects of COVID-19 and often the elections in the last few weeks. Today, we are at episode 245, and it's a special topic and a special show, Media After the Elections. This is part of the collaboration we've had with the Taricani Lecture Series on First Amendment rights at the University of Rhode Island. Previous episodes included meetings and opportunities to chat with Christian Amanpour, Nick Kristof, and Cheryl Wu Dunn. Today, we had a session earlier in the day about truth and trust, journalism post-election, a conversation with a panel of distinguished local journalists, and we met them and had a conversation. And tonight, you will get a chance to watch some of those highlights and also to meet Dean Jen Riley of the of the University of Rhode Island. She's the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and you'll also meet Laurie White Taricani. You'll meet both of them in just a minute. Hello, everyone. I'm Sree. Thank you so much for being here. We have, in honor of Rhode Island, a lighthouse and a boat. They're not actually from Rhode Island, but they were painted by my daughter on Long Island. And thank you so much for being here. I'm Sree. I'm the Marshall Loeb Visiting Professor of Digital Innovation at Stony Brook School of Journalism and co-founder of Digimentors, a social, digital, and virtual events consulting company. Thank you so much for being here. We're very grateful to all of you. If you haven't been here before, in our first 230 episodes, we had more than 1 million viewers, 156 million social impressions, 419 guests, 249 of them women, from 71 cities and 20 countries. We are on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn right now, and our archives are at youtube.com/Sreenet. We're very grateful to our sponsors for helping us put this all together, and to our producers, Rose Horowitz at Rose Horowitz 31. She's live tweeting, so please follow her, and Vandana Menon, Vandana_Menon. We are grateful to both of them for their work for these 245 days. Just before I bring on our guests, I want to let you know that we're going to have daily shows through episode 250. That's this Sunday night. It'll be an epic episode. Please join us. And then we are going to shift to a weekly or twice or 3 times a week, depending on what the news is and what guests we get. So we're going to continue the show. We're so grateful to everyone for their amazing feedback and support of this show. So thank you again. And now let's talk about the media after the elections. And our guests are Dean Jen Riley of the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Rhode Island, and Laurie White Taricani, the president of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce. The Taricani Lecture Series is named for Laurie's late husband, a pioneering investigative journalist, Jim Taricani. So let me bring both of them on, and let's say hello to everybody. Hi.
Hi. Nice to see you.
Thank you for being here. This is our third session like this, and I've learned so much about the importance of the First Amendment. That was the idea of this series. Let's ask Dean Jen Riley how you decided that this is a topic that you wanted to put together and host at the University of Rhode Island.
Well, Jim's career was based on protecting the First Amendment. He's known for the work he did, going under house arrest and keeping his sources private, the investigative journalism that he did. And what we want to show our students here at the University of Rhode Island is the integrity it takes to do journalism, why we need good journalism to protect our democracy today, and what the press, how I think the last week or so has shown us how important the press is to keeping us informed as citizens.
And so when Laurie came to you with this idea, you could pick up the story from there. Yeah.
You know, one of the things we try and do at the Harrington School of Communication is not just provide educational events for our students, but also provide events for the community, educational events, not just for what's happening here in the South Coast region of Rhode Island, but also for our alumni. How do we keep them connected to us? And we found, particularly in the last 8 months with COVID, having these events and doing them virtually has actually kept people more connected to us and engaged them more with the university overall.
That's great. And so these are just part of your dean's life. You have so many different virtual events. So talk to us a little bit about your relationship with Zoom. How much of it is love and how much of it is hate?
It's a necessary evil right now. It's how we get our jobs done, right? But like most people, I'm sure, and we all talk about it, sometimes you get on at 8 in the morning and you're not off until 5 o'clock at night, and it's exhausting. But to have that connection with people still, it can work. We've seen it with the Taricani event, bringing people back, the way the team came around behind it, the way you actually came in and moderated our events for us. And a whole community came about just to put this forward. So whether virtual or in person, I think it's all about how people relate to one another and communicate and build something productive together.
We've had many episodes on our series about how education is changing both at the K through 12 and at the college level. Can you share something about where you are right now as a university and how you're looking at the next year?
I think, like much of higher ed, we're recognizing that there's been a real shift in the paradigm of how we do business. We are still vested at URI in the face-to-face venture for our 18 to 22-year-olds who are coming here. We're a residential campus. It's one of the, I think it's that value added we bring to students. Come live here, experience it, be part of the community, engage with people who are different from you. But at the same time, in the last year, with the support of Governor Raimondo, we've launched URI Online. We're creating programs for the adult learner and expanding opportunities at URI to increase degree people who can get degrees in the state, as well as earn graduate certificates for career advancement. So we're starting to broaden our scope, which I think is necessary and in the long run is good for the state and good for the country.
Absolutely. Laurie, I'm going to come to you with some questions because I know you're getting to stay, but Jen has to go. I am curious about your message to parents like me whose kids are, applying to college right now and are worried about their next year and what happens and losing kind of their senior year of college, all of that. I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of parents of students you already have. I don't know if you have time to deal with the incoming student parents as well.
This is a challenging time. I mean, I live in a neighborhood with parents. I talk with them. I talk with parents at URI all the time. There's no good answer for any of us right now. We're all struggling with how to move through the pandemic. And one of the things I'm consistently saying to my students and to prospective students is keep your eye on that ball. That bachelor's degree is going to serve you well down the road. Come in, stay focused on gaining the skills you need to adapt to this changing world. If anything COVID has taught us in the last 8 months is the skills you need to adapt to change. We've seen it with restaurants. We've seen it with businesses. We've seen it with higher ed and K through 12. To learn how to do that, to think critically, to communicate effectively and work with others is essential. Many of us know this. The 18-year-old coming in today is going to work a job that we don't even know exists today. So I can't actually tell you what you need for that job, but I can tell you the core skills you need to be successful, and URI is vested in helping our students gain those.
Excellent. So my final question, unless Laurie has a question for you, is one of my friends used the term toxic productivity, that we're all working, as you said, from 8 in the morning till late at night on these Zoom calls. Everything has become so complicated and so filled with our time. But your background is you're a professor of English and British literature. You've taught poetry. Give us some things that you're reading or you would like to read if you had time. We'd love to get some suggestions.
So I have 2 books on my table right now that I want to read. One is Claudia Rankine's Just Us, which she came out with in the last few months.
Yeah.
If you haven't read Citizen, you should go out and read Citizen first. And I'm looking forward to reading Just Us and the writings that she does about racial issues and social justice in the United States is just very, very powerful. The other book I'm looking to read is Erosion by Terry Tempest Williams. It's her latest collection of essays, a fabulous environmentalist writer in the United States, talking about how our relationship with the land, how our need to protect national parks, the wild spaces that we exist in, are so central to our sense of being and who we are, and also essential to the United States.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for those recommendations. And Laurie, if you'd like to say anything to Jen before we let her go.
Well, I'll just tell Jen what I'm reading. And I actually got the idea from one of Sree's broadcasts a couple of nights ago, Cast. And it's The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. And it's about the philosophical caste systems that exists throughout the world and how those castes mentality get embedded in our culture over a long period of time, and then ultimately may in fact decide our fate as we live as citizens, and the pieces of that are subjective and that live within just under the surface. So I've only read about 35 pages of it so far, and it's so beautifully written, and I'm really enjoying it.
You're making me think of the novels of Aranti Roy, right? To go and read her wonderful work that looks at that very system.
Well,
it's a terrific. She's a terrific writer. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, Sree had some colleagues on a couple of nights ago, and they went through what they were reading, and I thought, hey, you know what? Let's just pile on and let's take the suggestion. So that's one of the marvelous functions you serve. Sree is our, a guide on how to, tap into all things that are current today and give us a better understanding of this very, very complicated world. But I did want to ask Jen about a topic that we were discussing in chamber business circles today, and that is the drive for students, not just young students, but even adult learners, to get certificates in various forms of specific core skills that employers are looking for today. So, wondering what the University of Rhode Island is doing on that front.
So part of what we're doing is through URI Online, creating graduate certificate programs and master's programs, but doing it in a modular way. So if you went and looked at our Masters of Healthcare Administration that went online in the last year with our College of Business, it's composed of 3 graduate certificates. So a working adult can come in and work on one graduate certificate, gain their skills in that area, and if they want to continue, they can stack these together to actually get to the full master's over a period of time. So we're trying to make it manageable and to make people, enable them to earn credentials in pieces as they build out their life. Because we know they're working adults, they have families, they're juggling their jobs and all of these other challenges. So that's one way that we're going after that.
Mm-hmm. Well, everybody is striving now, particularly at this point, to be a lifelong learner. And I know the university is driving towards that and picking up on all of the latest themes that our employer base is asking for, students that can come out and be well versed in the humanities, which you are a disciple of, but also other skills that again can be put to work right away.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. With that, we'll let Jen go. Dean Jen Riley of the College of Art and Sciences at the University of Rhode Island. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being such a hands-on leader in higher ed. I do a lot of these kinds of sessions, and very rarely do your counterparts even understand how some of these things work, let alone take a direct hands-on, roll up your sleeves kind of work that you do. So I'm very, very honored to work with you.
Happy to do it. It was great working with you, and Laurie, is always wonderful to work with you.
All right, we'll let you go. Thank you very much, Jen.
Have a good night.
Good night. Wow, she's awesome, and I'm so glad that we could bring her in for a little bit. So let's talk about media and the elections. Tell us how you came up with the topic for this week's show and how you put that together. I'll just put on the card so that people can see some of the names as you tell us about them as well.
Well, sure. So, Sree, you and I have worked on lectures 1 and 2, and when we got to the third in our conceived lecture series, it was targeted for November, and we thought, okay, well, let's do it the week after the election, and we can sort of go with the working title of "What the Heck Just Happened." We knew that something big was going to happen either way, and that, you know, we even wondered, right, Sree, if if the election would be officially called as of this
That's
point,
right.
whether the Electoral College would actually be able to come to fruition later next month. But so at this point, it is pretty well decided. And, I wanted to really focus on the role of the media in local elections and the thoughts that we've been talking about in the first two, talking about, a lot of what's happening globally and nationally with in parts all around the world with dictatorships and the like, and how freedom of the press is really a beacon for societies. But I think for people to really understand it at a granular level and really appreciate what it means, you got to bring it down to the local level. And it was great to talk with Dan Barry today and a panel of local journalists. And we talked about what it means, foundationally, and what it means to our own communities, and how important it is, the role of the news media to be able to, cover these events that are just, really hyper local, because they build up into larger things, covering, as he pointed out, the zoning board of review, the board of education, small mayoral races, because this is where, democracy starts, right? Right at the grassroots level. So, talking about how important it is for newspapers to stay in business, and also for local broadcast journalism to continue to earn the trust of the listeners, the viewers, and the role that they play in, teasing out what is true, what's fake news, and what isn't. So a lot of really shocking things came out today in our discussion, and some things that I frankly was surprised at.
And we also had these great guests. You want to tell us a little bit about each of them?
Sure. Well, this particular group of individuals, each of these individuals were very close to Jim. They were very close professional colleagues over the course of his 40 years as a broadcast journalist and founder of the I-Team at WJR-TV Providence and NBC station. And it's a combination of print journalists who Jim has great affection for, and also some of his former colleagues on the I-Team. So Dan Barry is now a New York Times columnist, a very well-known writer and figure, and very close to Jim when he worked in Providence at the Providence Journal. We have the successor to Jim's I-Team. Jim retired a few years before he passed away, so he had some time to relax. And in that period, he was able to mentor some new folks to come in and succeed him on the I-Team. So Katie Davis and Parker Gavigan joined us and talked about how the I-Team has evolved over the years, and even, much more dramatically so during the course of this election. And Diana Kelch, who was Jim's former business partner and colleague on the I-Team, and also M. Charles Baxt, who was, had a 45-year career as the chief political writer at the Providence Journal, one of America's oldest daily publications. And so we had a very robust conversation about some of, all the crazy things about how, this business has really evolved. But between and among all of them, I think the fundamental concern and takeaway was the massive anger of the electorate and the distrust of people in authority, and how that plays out as, people being very polarized, whether you're on one side or the other, you're polarized, and a lot of times you don't really want to understand or appreciate exactly, where the truth is if it contradicts your existing point of view.
And that is so sad that that's the situation we're in. Let's look at a couple of the comments coming in. Anish Bashir is watching from Kerala. Ashok Motwani says namaste. Paula Kiger is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Hi, Paula. Great to have you here. Stefan's watching from Ramsey, New Jersey. They're both part of my Digimentors team. Pradnya Haldipur is watching from Silver Spring, Maryland. And Charles and Mary Cunnan Carroll are always here watching from New Jersey. So grateful to you both for being here. Rose says the URI, she's talking, she got to watch this morning also, and this afternoon, and URI expanding offering, the online offering, says Dean Riley. Jonathan Borstein has watched 245 days in a row. The last time you were on this show, Laurie, was 118 days ago when we did the Christian Amanpour. And so here we are, time sort of going fast and standing still for me at the same time.
That is actually not true, Sree. That is not true. I was on your show for your birthday.
That's true. That's true. The surprise birthday episode. Thank you. That was awesome.
Also on for the New York Times read along. So this is, I think, my 5th or 6th year on your show. So who knew?
And we should point out that Dan Barry was in the New York Times read along and was also terrific. Both of you on separate days did a great job helping us understand the news and read it through your eyes. The New York Times read along is Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. We're celebrating our 5th anniversary of doing that and learning a lot along the way. Rose says Claudia Rankin is a wonderful poet. And Charles has a question about COVID impacting teaching institutions financially. So I know that you've talked to each of those big universities in the greater Providence area are part of your orbit as the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Can you talk a little bit about universities and what you can share?
Sure. Well, what I know about that is the testing protocol is really key. And a lot of the institutions are making sure that they are testing students, a couple of times a week in order to keep the entire student body safe and also to catch an outbreak early before it spreads. So that's, the whole notion of containment is really important. And those institutions that are spending an enormous amount of money on the testing protocols, that's really where the financial strife is really coming. But it's paying off because, they're able to identify a cluster before it becomes a super spreader event.
And that's something that they all need to be careful of and pay attention to. Rose says, hi, Laurie, I'm just starting CAST. And Rick says, is post-election truth and trust an oxymoron? Disinformation and distrust rules the media waves of fake patriotism. And Rick says, was the lecture recorded for public review? Yes. So you're going to see excerpts right now for the next 30, 40 minutes. We're going to play some excerpts, but the entire video series, that one, as well as Nick Kristof and Cheryl Wu Dunn, as well as the one with Christian Amanpour, they're all available on, if you just Google Taricani Lecture, you'll find it. Taricani, you see it in Laurie's name right there. Taricani Lecture, you'll find all 3 of them, and you can watch them at the University of Rhode Island the entire hour. So let's get started. We're going to go right to the first part where we had... we were able to see, I was talking to Dan Barry, and I asked him about how he's looking at the elections. And so we'll watch this for a little bit, and then I'll ask you for your thoughts, and then we'll move on as well. And folks, please post your comments. That's Dan Barry of the New York Times, formerly of the Providence Journal.
Rhode Island journalists as well. So we want to hear from you. The hashtag we're using is hashtag URI Taricani. So first, Dan, thank you for being here. And this is a homecoming of sorts for you in Rhode Island. My first question is to tell us your kind of thoughts on the coverage of this election, which appears to be still going on.
What election, Sree, you're referring to? I think the coverage has been quite sound. whether there were mistakes in anticipation of the election and certain assumptions that were made, that's also perhaps part of the conversation. But the coverage has been, I thought, remarkable. I'm obviously going to boost the New York Times' coverage, which is every day had a special section dedicated specifically to the election and covering every nook and cranny and development in what's been happening in this most extraordinary, protracted election.
And what are some things that I know you're not a political reporter, but you certainly have observations about this moment?
I think that the media will continue to have to self-examine. Okay, so we went through this period in 2016 where the polls apparently misread the country and much of the media, and I might have been as guilty of that as anybody. I was wandering the country. I wasn't writing about politics. And it wasn't until the end of 2016, around October, that I saw Confederate flags in Pennsylvania. And as I recall, Pennsylvania was not part of the Confederacy, but it was saying something else. And I didn't really follow up on that. Now in 2020, you think that the media would have learned its lesson, or their lesson, the polling would have been different. And yet again, the polls and the coverage leading up to the election were suggesting an outcome that wasn't what it turned out to be, in part because the polling was not recognizing the votes or the inclinations of people of Latino descent. And not that that's not a block, Latino covers a lot. And so we missed how the people in Miami and how people in the Imperial Valley in California felt. Also how the Trump administration, the Trump campaigns, trying to describe the Democrats as socialists and communists, that found traction among people who had come from countries where there had in fact been dictatorships or authoritarian governments. So with some exceptions, including a couple of my colleagues, Jenny Medina and Patricia Mazzei, we largely, I think, missed that. But I think that the coverage, Sree, of the election and also the refusal to give too much air to allegations of election fraud without evidence has been a shining moment for the media.
And one of the things that we are all watching right now is how the accusations of election fraud are causing kind of the standstill in parts of what should be happening with the transition. Let's talk a little bit about the process of polling. Your colleague, Nate Cohn, who does a lot of the polling at the New York Times, said that the mistakes the New York Times and others, the mistakes the polling got wrong in the calculations they got wrong in 2016 were even worse this time. But because the Biden lead was so, was strong enough to kind of counter that, what would have happened to polling if, in fact, it had been completely wrong, not just the directionally wrong, but the amount, if it had been, in fact, that Trump had won?
Well, I'm not a pollster, right? And I think you're right that Nate did say that this was worse because it felt a little bit like fool me once, shame on me. But, I don't know how to answer that, Sree. I think that it's become an existential. First of all, Nate was saying this morning that it's a little too early to do the forensic examination, that the body laying across America is still warm. But I think that in the future, it's going to be, all right, what are we going to do differently? I mean, the reality is that maybe you noticed this too. I would watch the news and they would show a poll result from, say, Iowa or from some other state. And at the very bottom in very small lettering, it would say that the sample was 750 people or 643 people. And I think that journalists of their worth would know you have to have a larger sample than that. I mean, at least 1,000. That's what I would remember, to suggest that this is what the entire state is saying based on a sampling of 743 people or what have you is a mistake. Also, the recognition that people don't necessarily want to tell a polling service the truth. And part of that is because of President Trump's constant beating the drum of a fake media or a fake news, that there's an agenda at play here. So if you ascribe to the Trump worldview and you get a call from someone polling for the New York Times, are you going to tell them the truth? Also, they were not, I think, and Nate was pointing this out as well, that for some reason they were not capturing in their polling people of Latino descent, certainly not enough.
All right, I'm going to pause there. We are going back to our conversation. You're seeing highlights of our conversation that we did earlier today, Laurie, I, Jen Riley, with Dan Barry first, and then a panel of folks who are local reporters and journalists in Rhode Island. Laurie, I just wanted you to reflect a little bit on what Dan had to say, and then we'll go listen to a little bit of that panel as well.
Yeah, a couple of things, jumped out at me as well. Observers may have been under the impression that since the Trump administration was, at least on its face, so anti-immigrant with the wall, et cetera, that the immigrant and Latino community, Hispanic community, would perhaps, have taken offense, continued to take offense to that, and not necessarily have warmed up to the message of the president. But as Dan points out, the Latino community, not a monolithic block, and so many segments of that, and all of those segments, again, dispersed geographically. So the constituencies in Florida looked very different than the constituencies, along the border, perhaps in Mexico. But the idea that this notion of socialism and that the Biden presidency would usher in a period of socialism, to me was, shocking. The idea that dictatorship, in fact, was such a raw thing for the Hispanic Latino voter, and that the pollsters, I don't understand, how the Biden campaign actually was able to not spot that in the due diligence that they were doing, in the market research and the focus groups and their own set of polling. So, that did fly a little bit under the radar screen, and was actually a very poignant observation by Dan.
Thank you. And he was terrific. And folks should read his columns and read his book as well, based on his column, This Land. Rick is putting a link to the Taricani lecture page so that you can watch all of these on your own without our commentary. And Rick asks, what are the best written articles to psychologically and sociologically explain the widespread support for Trumpism? I would say, anybody have any suggestions, please jump in and feel free to post in the comments if you have any suggestions. I will make two recommendations that both by one journalist, Adam Server, who wrote what I think was the most important article to explain the first 3 years of the Trump administration. We always say, oh, this is so cruel, that's so cruel, and he says the cruelty is the point. President Trump and his supporters find community by rejoicing in the suffering of those they hate and fear. And then he wrote, if you can believe it, the same journalist was able to put together an article on what I think is one of the best articles about the first 3 months of the coronavirus. And the coronavirus was an emergency until Trump found out who was dying, meaning mostly Black and Latino folks were disproportionately affected. And that really brought a lot of attention. Adam was a guest on this show, episode number 80. Today's episode 245. So if you go all the way back to the beginning of June, this would have been soon after the killing of George Floyd, we did an episode where Adam was a guest. So please go back and watch that if you can, and listen to Adam, who talks as a to me, he's a former student. He'll always be a young Black man, and he talks about what it was like to be a young Black man raising a young daughter and covering this and writing about this really amazing writer. So please check that out. Thanks for your question, Rick, and lots of other observations by Dan were really useful and interesting. But we're going to move forward now to another section so that people can learn a little bit about our guests, the other guests who are there. And again, do follow Dan's work. He is a great reporter and someone you'll all want to read. So this was the panel that Laurie had put together. You see Charles Baxt, M. Charles Baxt, retired from the Providence Journal. Katie Davis and Parker Gavigan are from the WJR I team, I for investigations or investigative. And Diana Kelch, who is formerly also of the I team. She's now a PR professional. And so you picked these four folks, Laurie, and you wanted to get their perspective, a local journalism perspective on what was happening with the elections.
Yeah. It was interesting to hear Charlie. Charlie's, been retired for a number of years, but, to think about so much that's happened on the journalistic front, and even in the very few short years that he's been retired, the demise of many, print publications and the like. But, Charlie actually took on Dan Barry a little bit. He said, hey, the polls were pretty right on, they weren't as far off as perhaps Dan was leading us to believe that, he was, on that track. So I enjoyed hearing, Charlie's perspective on, his deep breadth of knowledge on elections going back decades and decades. But, at the end of the day, he was able to unearth the deep cynicism that some parts of our community, some parts of society really feel towards members of the news media. And it's, it's a very sobering thing to think about. And even in the short period of time that my husband has been out of the business, before he passed away, so much has changed in terms of reverence for journalism and journalists. My husband was very much viewed as someone that people could trust. And, in the last 4 years, all of that notion of trust and faith in, the works of journalism has really taken a massive shift. And, we can talk a little bit about that.
Sure, we will. I since we mentioned Dan and Jim Taricani, let's talk a little bit about this incredible column.
Yeah, so Dan Barry attended Jim's his funeral last June, so June 2019, and this was a very interesting moment. And we were gathering in front of the church, and Dan was part of an honor guard of prominent journalists that came from actually all over the country to be part of this funeral service and honor guard. And so I was standing there and watching them take the casket out of the hearse. It was all, ceremonial relative to, getting the honor guard lined up and moving the casket into place, et cetera. And it was a beautiful, beautiful day, beautiful summer day that you couldn't hear a pin drop. Or you could hear a pin drop. It was, just bright and beautiful and sunshine. It was, not a single sound anywhere except the clicking of the, shoes on the tarmac, if you will. And then all of a sudden, right out of like the blue, out of nowhere, some individual standing on the other side of the street, screams and bellows, I hope you burn in hell, right? So it kind of punctuated the air in a very, in a very disturbing way. So we hadn't actually gone in the church yet. We were just about to actually, the hymns were playing. We were just about to, process down the aisle with the casket, bringing it in. And my first reaction was like, I was absolutely furious, like with, how could this happen? How could this happen? But it only took me like a second to realize, like, wait a minute, this is actually pretty cool. Jim would probably think this was amazing because it was indeed somebody who was standing on the other side of the street and wanted to, express a point of view that, of course, I didn't appreciate at the time, but I appreciated the sentiment of it and the importance of somebody, shouting that, as inappropriate as it was. So it was really fascinating a week later when, I read Dan's column. It was, the following week after this. And, I'm a former journalism major myself, former journalist myself. So of course, he led with that. And, if you go back to the headline of, for a reporter, burn in hell was the ultimate compliment, because that's what Jim stood for. And he was willing to sacrifice his freedom for the First Amendment. So.
Well, I mean, that's as I said, an incredible column, folks. If you just Google "burn in hell" Taricani or "burn in hell" Dan Barry, you'll find this column. So definitely, please take a look. It's really beautifully written, and it was in the Sunday Review. I'm sure Jim would have enjoyed all of that and had a smile as he thought of this. So let's now move on to the panel itself, and I'm now going to play a little excerpt from the first question we asked each of them. And by the way, a great range of ages and backgrounds here as well from these folks. And Diana, as you mentioned, worked directly with Jim, and so it's great that she was able to join us.
Election coverage.
Well, I will say that my thoughts reflect much of what he said about Jim, and I would be remiss if I didn't kind of pile on that one, because I was one of those people that was mentored by him. And I think an important thing I was thinking about was always when he did stories, and we did stories together, they weren't always favorable, as you can guess, and political campaigns, even locally, our coverage wasn't always favorable. But the feedback that we consistently got was that we got thanked for our stories, even if we did a negative story. So people would say, well, I didn't come across that well, but thank you for being fair. And I'm concerned that the public's trust right now has diminished to that. And I'd be interested in what Katie and Parker have to say about that, because just from anecdotally from people that I know, all they want to do is badmouth the media, and they blame the media for not reporting things that are positive to them. Their expectation seems to be, if you do a story that uncovers something, that you somehow are targeting folks. So I'm a little troubled by that from a local perspective.
All right. Thank you very much, Diana. Let's go to Charlie. Charlie, how are you doing? Thank you for being here. Your thoughts on what Dan had to say and your own observations, please.
Nice to see you. It's an honor to be here. Jim was a very good friend of mine, and it always struck me, particularly in later years, he was so tough and so famous, and yet personally he was very shy, and he didn't. I liked being a celebrity to the extent that I was a celebrity with my picture in the paper and so on. But I would meet him for breakfast, and he'd be sitting in the corner, and he did not crave publicity. Let me put it that way. He's very low key like that. I had some thoughts listening to Dan. I thought he was a little tough on the polls when he seemed to suggest, okay, well, they got it wrong again. But think about it. They said Biden was going to win, and Biden did win. They said Biden would carry Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Georgia, and Arizona, and he did. I think some of this is illusionary in that it took so long to count the votes. because of the email, and it seemed like it was really, suspenseful and drawn out. But I think that Biden won by enough of a margin. I thought that the one reason it might have been a problem with the polls is I remember in the last few days when everybody was reporting that they showed Biden ahead, the Trump people would say, "Well, no, you're underestimating our get out the vote capability, the organizational aspect of it." And I think that it turned out to have some truth to it. And I think that's going to be a challenge for reporters in the future. And by the way, even though the newspapers and the television stations and so on were reporting that Biden was ahead, nobody said, "Okay, well, we're not going to cover Trump anymore." He got tremendous coverage for his rallies and so forth. And I do think that the media did a very good job during the campaign of labeling lies as lies and saying that Trump was saying this and that without foundation. But I think this is a real challenge for the mainstream media. I think Dan touched on it a little bit. No matter how much the networks and the leading newspapers and so on report the truth, it's hard to get the truth into the heads of people who are members of a cult, which is the way I categorize many of the Trump people. And I say that because the television would go and interview some of these people at rallies. First of all, of course, nobody had masks on or whatever. And when you would say to one of these rally attendants, "What are you doing here without masks? Whether aren't you worried about the coronavirus?" They say, "Well, that's all the hoax." I don't know how you get through to people like that. I'd be interested to hear what the other people have to say.
Thank you, Charlie. Appreciate your comments. Let me go to Katie to talk a little bit about her view as an investigative reporter, as a member of that I-team.
I think Diana made such a great point when it comes to people at home not necessarily having the trust in the media. And I even hesitate to use that phrase, the media, right? Because they're putting so many groups who are not journalists into that same group when folks at home might be saying that. And I think we've seen that lately. I know myself and Parker, we've had viewers reaching out to us, asking us to investigate what they think is election fraud. When we look into it, that's not accurate. There's not actually even the possibility of fraud. And then sometimes they'll say, "Well, you guys won't investigate it because you've been paid off." Which, just think about that. How crazy is that to think that we as local reporters in Rhode Island would have somehow been paid off by like a national organization to not investigate something? It's just kind of mind-blowing, but that is kind of the mindset of some folks that are out there. And Rhode Island is a very blue state, but that's certainly not to say that it's monolithic. When you look at all 39 cities and towns that we have some cities and towns that went 60% for President Trump. So really, when you're covering a region as a local journalist, just how the entire state votes is not indicative of all the communities within that state. And I know Dan knows this well, having covered Rhode Island for many years. It's so different depending where you go, in Massachusetts as well.
Thank you, Katie. Let's go to Patrick and get his thoughts. Patrick? Oh, sorry, Parker. I'm so sorry.
It's all right. People either call me Patrick or Gavin, so you got one of them.
Let me do it right. Parker Gavigan, I-team reporter, WJAR TV.
Thank you, Sree. Thank you. No, I think, you could see this coming in 2016 when the president first ran, and just this rhetoric from him, this adversarial position against the media from an early stage, and the chance of fake news. I shun to think of it because it's so troubling as a reporter. And of course, locally we're not covering the race nationally, but you look at all of the hardworking folks who are out there just doing their jobs as reporters at these rallies across across the country. And it starts from the top with the president's rhetoric. And that, of course, has trickled down to the average folks and people that, we might encounter out on the street. I think, my lesson really from this election, it was really different because obviously we had a presidential election going on amid a pandemic. And what really changed for me, I saw my role in the election as really being an informative reporter. We had so many deadlines. Obviously, the influx of mail ballots. I mean, more than 100,000 people in Rhode Island voted before the election by mail. This was unprecedented, right? So we just had, we had so many things changing. People needed to be informed about deadlines, about registrations. How do they do this? How do they? We hadn't really traversed this landscape before, and I think voters were very confused. In the past, you just show up on election day and vote. Very minimal amount of folks do so beforehand by mail ballot. So it seemed like every day, every week, there were different directions that we needed to go in and inform the public. Hey, this is what you need to do. Especially, like, for instance, I remember the week before the election. What if you were told by the health department that you needed to quarantine, but you planned on voting in person? Now, what do you do? So I just remember, just taking this role with, okay, here are some problems, inherent problems that people are going to encounter. How do we help them get through this?
Thank you very much for that. We have lots of alumni. So we're just going to pause there and let's bring Laurie back to reflect on these comments.
Well, Katie's comments really just blew me away when she was suggesting that her viewers were calling in and saying, "Oh, forget it. You've been paid off." To me, it's a shocking revelation, or it's a shocking snapshot as to how little the public really understands the role of the news media and also the way the news media functions. So a lot of times you hear about the need for financial literacy in this country, but I think by the end of our program, Sree, when we had some of our concluding comments, we all agreed on the need that we need media literacy so that we can that the public has a better understanding of not just what the role of the media is as a gatekeeper, as a way to provide checks and balances on government and the fourth estate, but also the way the media operates and understanding about how facts are brought into the picture, and that people just don't call and say, "Oh, guess what? This is something, go put it on TV," that there's actually rigor around it. And we use the term rigor, examination, balance, accuracy, trust, fairness. So this leads me to believe that in this day and age, and I don't know what's happened over the last, couple of years and why this all just, blew up on us, but people do not understand the role of the newspaper, the radio station, television station, the reality-based media, not the partisan media or the advocacy journalists, which there are so many of them, these days that, masquerade as journalists, but they're really advocacy journalists. They're commentators. Some of them are commentators, and they're paid to express an opinion. But what I'm talking about is reality-based journalists working for mainstream, very highly respected, longstanding publications and institutions that take their responsibilities very, very, very seriously. So that's a real challenge for us as a nation, but also back to what we were talking about right at the very beginning, the purpose of this lecture series and the important role that our universities, our colleges, our journalism schools throughout this country, the role that they have to play to make sure that the next set of responsible journalists are coming out, but also the role of the journalist in actually understanding to the public its role in the media literacy.
Thank you so much for pointing all of that out. before we go, I just wanted to share a couple of videos about Jim for our audience that may not be familiar with his story. So set up this video for us, please.
Okay.
And is this, in this video, do you hear that shout or no? Was that before?
No, you know, I listen, you know, I have my own recording of the funeral service, believe it or not. I guess, you know, that's what happens.
I believe it.
That's what happens when you are married to a journalist. I wanted to preserve it, but yeah, I've listened. I went back and I listened, and I did not hear it. But this is exactly the moment where the coffin is being brought in, and these are all the, you know, the honor guard. You can see them on the periphery of the screen there, and I was, you know, facing the casket a little bit further back, and it was just a horrendous moment. But anyway, I had to pause. I had to pause when that happened, when that comment was made, you know, go burn in hell. And I actually took a little 60-second time out and went in the back of the church and into the ladies' room and just hyperventilated for a minute, and then said, okay, you know, it dawned on me that this was really actually what it was all about. So I came back out and we were ready to begin.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And let's play this video. It's a beautiful day, I see.
Yeah, it was. It was spectacular. There they all are, the media.
And there's Jim.
I thought, and I still believe, that showing people in video form of actually showing them what public corruption looked like was something the public should know about.
This is such fertile ground for everything we do in this business, covering, you know, the mob and scandals and political scandals.
And that was the video from. So I'm going to also show another video. There was a story that was done by PRI. So let me play that. Mm-hmm. And thank you for letting me show these. And I know this must be bittersweet to have these all kind of living online and easily accessible.
Yeah, it's actually very beautiful, and it's very comforting at the same time.
Sure. So let's take a look at this video.
A knock at the door from Jim Taricani was almost always an unwelcome sound to a collection of crooks and politicians in southern New England. Taricani began his storied news career in radio in the late 1970s before launching his television career here at WPRI 12. He soon became chief investigative reporter at WJAR. Taricani covered organized crime during its heyday and was famously given a rose by the son of legendary mob boss Raymond L.S. Patriacca at Patriacca's funeral in 1984. In 2001, Taricani aired this FBI surveillance tape, which shows a top lieutenant to then Mayor Vincent Buddy Cianci accepting an envelope containing a cash bribe. The story drew the ire of a federal judge who demanded to know Taricani's source. Taricani refused. It was the rare occasion of the media covering the media. As WPRI reported in 2004, Taricani was sentenced to home confinement.
Judge Ernest Torres said he was very concerned about Taricani's health. In fact, the judge said the only reason he was not sending Taricani to prison was his health.
In the wake of his case, Taricani became a national voice in the fight for a reporter's shield law, which would protect journalists from federal prosecution if they refused to reveal their sources.
We thought at our station, and I thought, and I still believe, that showing people in video form of actually showing them what public corruption looked like was something the public should know about.
After suffering 2 heart attacks in 1986, Taricani received a new lease on life with a heart transplant in 1996. He took a short intermission from news as press secretary to Governor Lincoln Almond at that time. Taricani was the winner of multiple awards, including 5 regional Emmy Awards and an Edward R. Murrow Award for investigative reporting. He is survived by his wife, Laurie White, the head of the Providence Chamber of Commerce. Taricani retired from WJAR in 2014 and lived in Narragansett. In a 2005 interview, Taricani talked about why he stayed in Rhode Island rather than moving on to a larger market or even to network news.
This is such fertile ground for everything we do in this business, covering, the mob and scandals and political scandals. It's the same reasons I love it here. I've had some opportunities to move on in my career, but this is a great place to be. It's a great state. It's a great state to report on.
On a personal note,
and that was really very, very nicely done. And that photograph says, "We triple check everything." I like that. Instead of just double check, we triple check everything. That's a quote from Jim.
Yeah, no, that was in the that was like from 1986. That little piece there, that newspaper article, magazine article. So he was a youngster back then. But you know what? It's interesting. They talked about Raymond Patriarca and Jim being invited into his wake, and all the FBI agents going, well, how the heck did that happen? And but as we talked about in tonight in the lecture series, back then reporters were respected for being fair, even if they didn't like the way they were portrayed. They knew that there was no axe to grind, and it was simply a matter of a reporter doing his or her job. And all of that has faded away today. But if the mob boss, his son, can allow a journalist to come in as a sign of respect, and again, this was in, the late 80s, early 90s, exactly. Don't exactly remember the year that Raymond Patriarca Sr. died, but, that's kind of the way it was up until now. Then this is where we are, and, members of the press are vilified. And, but again, I believe it all gets back to not understanding, the roots of our civic lives, not understanding the Constitution, the fact that journalism and reporting is the only profession that's embedded in the Constitution as a protection. And journalism schools have their work cut out for them going forward to make sure that we as a society, once again, have trust and faith in our local journalists and et cetera.
No, that's certainly right. I'm also just always, whenever I hear that part about him having a heart transplant, that has got to be one of the most complicated and difficult things for a family to go through. And especially with the technology then, right? Obviously things have changed and become so much better.
Yeah, that was in 1996. So he lived for 10 years, sort of being rather compromised, but, he still got out there every day and, did his thing, and then got to a point where he was, almost done, if you will. And after being in the hospital for about 6 weeks, a donor heart became available. And so, but he lived, a very, very rich life from 1996 to roughly 2015. So he had a great run. He was very healthy. He was very robust. He was very cheerful. He was very grateful. He was an advocate for organ donation and spoke all over the country about the First Amendment. And so he, he was a complicated person, and certainly he had a lot of, crosses to bear, and, not with just his health, but all the things in the legal system and just the stress and strain of being an investigative reporter, and the pressure to get it right and to be right, and not face litigation or libel or slander suits and the like. And he handled it all with aplomb. So.
And that is this series is such a great tribute to him, and I'm so glad you and the family were able to pull that with friends to pull together this lecture series. And I hear that we were told today that it'll continue next year as well. So that's exciting.
Well, and the folks at URI have been absolutely amazing at the Harrington School of Communications and Media. And I was really thrilled today, Sree, because you have been our moderator, our lead presenter on this series. And I'm so grateful to you and to your family and to your team for coming in and stepping into this role. And it's so important that I selected someone that understands the pillars of journalism, and the fact that we first met you when you were at Columbia. I know that you understand all the key elements, and they're all so close to your heart, and you have your own student population today that you're training. So I couldn't think of a better person to be part of this than you. So thank you, Sree.
That's so kind. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll remind everybody that our guest has been Laurie White Taricani, and if you search the Taricani Lecture Series on YouTube, you'll be able to find 3 different lectures, one by Christian Amanpour, and one by Cheryl Wu Dunn and Nicholas Kristoff, and all of them are easily available when you Google. And with that, I'll also remind you that we have 5 more episodes in the daily part version of this show. We've been doing it every day it'll be 250 episodes as of Sunday. So we'll go out with a bang. Please send in your suggestions, and we'll continue to cover COVID-19 because it is with us, and it is with us in much bigger way than any of us could have dreamed when we started the series, when we started lockdown. And the fact that we have been over 100,000 new cases every single day for 7 days in a row, that's more than Japan has had in its entire 7 months. And that tells you just one stat that tells you how terrible the situation's been. But we will continue to cover this, and we'll be on once, twice, 3 times a week as needed. But with that, I want to thank Laurie, who's been a great friend of the show. And thank you very much, everybody, for watching. And we'll see you soon. Bye, Laurie. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.